Rock City, UK is Aylesbury, Buckinghamshire, England. Claimed by some to be the geographical centre of England, and by others to be the centre of the rock music universe. We're going to scrutinise the Aylesbury area in a way that it's never been looked at before. So stand by for some rock revelations to titillate your curiosity and whet your musical appetite. Aylesbury lies about 40 miles northwest of London, just beyond the Chiltern Hills. It also sits at the centre of a triangle from Buckingham in the north, High Wycombe to the west, and Leighton Buzzard to the east. It was this triangle that felt the direct influence of the great Aylesbury rock explosion. The Nag's Head here in High Wycombe became an important rock venue in the late 60s, thanks largely to the charisma of local promoter Ron Watts. Many an illustrious rock star has walked through those doors. Ron, famous also for his promotions at the 100 Club in London, became known as the godfather of punk in those glorious 70s.
Well, the Nag's Head started off as a blues venue during the blues boom, and all the blues regulars played down here, like Freddie King and Howlin' Wolf, and Jimi Hendrix sat in that chair over there. He didn't get to play, though.
The Nag's Head, that was an entirely different kettle of fish. That was more eyeball to eyeball. You had people right in front of you, and you could communicate what you were trying to do, and you could see an appreciation. It was quite a small place, more intimate, sweaty.
About 76, the end of 76, when I was promoting at the 100 Club, I decided to import all the new, then, punk things out to High Wycombe. So we saw the Sex Pistols, Clash, Damned, Billy Idol, Generation X. Elvis Costello played his first gig here. All the American bands like Wayne County, Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers. And lately, we've just been continuing going through the same thing.
Nag's Head was the only place really for people who were interested in music and the latest sort of fashion to meet, because High Wycombe was quite a straight place where it was at the time. Our first gig, I think, was at the Nag's Head as well. Ron Watts gave us a chance to put us on, and I don't think we ever got paid, but it was like the big time for us, supporting 999, I think it was. From those early days at Nag's Head in High Wycombe, here we are, doing my second album for Matt Bianco. It's turned out quite well for me.
Howard Jones has been here very recently, and just sort of walked out here one night, and the next day he was a star all over the world. Tonight we got 3 bands from the area: Strange Moves, the Road Knights, and Basta Rock, who come from this parish. It's good.
They cheat us with their weekly prize. So shout out for truth, shout out for truth, don't take their subtle lies. Lose your thoughts in new ones, lose yourself in the hour of darkness. Everybody feel it, ha ha. If you're left on the shelf, well, it's not for me, 'cause it's a black yellow rock. Howling through the hills at night. Black yellow rock. Howling through the hills at midnight now. Little power call. Understood, but the choice in the matter is left to you. It's all in such a good, yeah, yes, it could be deceiving. Choose a rhythm with some meaning, let your body feel it, ha ha. If they're left on the shelf, well, that's not for me, 'cause it's a black yellow rock. Howling through the hills at night. Black hills at midnight now.
in prehistoric Aylesbury, round about the early 60s, the Grosvenor, which promoted wrestling and bingo, finally gave in to rock and roll. Promoter Eddie Friday became Aylesbury's granddad of rock.
We opened for rock and roll on February the 6th, 1962, at the Grosvenor Ballroom in the Market Square, Aylesbury. Our opening group was Johnny Kidd and the Pirates. So we had a wonderful crowd, all raring to go, the girls enjoying the dancing with their little flared skirts and the fellows with their jackets off and twirling the girls around their shoulders. I really enjoyed it the first night. Over the years, we've had most of the top bands. I think one of the first in the hit parade was Craig Douglas. One of the next groups to appear was the Barrow Knight. Now, that was in 1962 time. Following that, we had Emil Ford and the Checkmates. One of my most memorable nights was the first visit of Gene Vincent to the Grosvenor. I had one or two American groups. The main one amongst these was Patti LaBelle and her Bells. And what a delightful quartet they were. Following Patti LaBelle, I'd had him several times before as Jerry Dorsey. On this occasion, he was now Humperdinck because he just topped the bill at the London Palladium. And his price went up from £60, including the group, to £420 for himself. Now, that wasn't the biggest crowd we had. The biggest was, in fact, on February the 29th, 1964, leap year night, when we had the Swinging Blue Jeans, top of the hit parade with Hippie Hippie Shake, and what a crowd. We turned at least 500 away, and people were selling my 7 6-penny tickets, the admission price, for £1 each side. I thought that was success indeed.
Yeah, Eddie Friday. Years ago, years before time with Whitesnake and stuff like that. I was just living in Buckingham and playing locally with bands. We used to dream of playing at the assembly rooms, you know, playing in real big gigs, but he was like real disciplinarian, you know, you couldn't wear this, you couldn't wear that. But it was a great gig to play in those days, and places like that just don't exist anymore, around about that way. He was a really sort of strange guy to work with, but very easygoing, you know, one of those type of people. I always remember one thing was when we played there, finally made it the grade and got there to the assembly rooms, there was a line across the back of the stage where you couldn't put your amps in front of, and all I can remember when I went to see the Cream there was I wonder if they've got their amps in front, Eddie would be out in a minute moaning. It's terrible. Great geezer.
In an article entitled Why I Joined the Stones by Bill Wyman, he says in an interview, I'll quote, "I first got the idea that I would like to play in a group when I went on holiday in Aylesbury Bucks. It was the summer of 1960, and one evening I went along to a local hall to see the show. There were several groups on the bill, but the only one I can remember is Duke Dumond and the Barrow Knights. I'll never forget the way the sound hit me as I walked in the door. It stirred me and made me feel strange and excited. Oh, by the way, see that building over there? David Bowie played there." On the night of August the 8th, 1963, under this railway bridge at Linslade near Aylesbury, the great train robbery was implemented. No one really knows how much cash was involved, apart from me, and it was £2,613,000. Ronnie Biggs didn't hang around too long to breathe the Aylesbury air that night, but it obviously influenced his decision some years later to team up with the Sex Pistols in their epic release of The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. The great train robbers were eventually tried here at the 18th century county court. It was here also that Keith Richards was tried in 1977, and he and Mick Jagger made regular visits to the town for a while. In sentencing, Judge Verney, perhaps realising Aylesbury's special role in rock and roll, did not send Keith to jail. After all, it was his first appearance in Aylesbury since the Stones played the Granada Cinema in January '64. Eventually, a 19-year-old youth set fire to the building and completely gutted the interior. He did it, he said, because some of my mates have been sentenced here. The youth was eventually tried, but obviously not in this building, as he'd already burnt it down. For any gourmets who are interested, this is an Aylesbury duck. For anyone who isn't, this is. North Marsden is a beautiful little village a couple of miles out of Aylesbury. It used to belong to one John Camden Neild, who left it to Queen Victoria in his will. She promptly sold it and spent the money buying Balmoral. About the same time, or so they say, Pete Frame, the eminent rock historian and guru, moved into Yeoman Cottage.
Rock family trees, which I'm most well known for now, I guess, started as a result of my shortcomings in rock journalism. I was a rock journalist. I used to run a magazine called Zigzag, and I found myself getting more and more bogged down with convoluted prose, trying to detail all the changes of personnel in different bands. And it seemed to me that it would be much easier if I did them in a sort of graphic way. Someone like Rod Stewart, he moved through all sorts of different groups, like Steam Packet and Shotgun Express and the Jeff Beck group. And rather than try and explain that all and who he played with in each group, it's much easier to just put it down in this sort of way. And so I started doing that about 15 years ago, I guess. And I must have done upwards of 100 different family trees, covering maybe up to 500 groups.
We're in the lounge bar of the King's Head Aylesbury, dating back to the mid-15th century. The stained glass windows here bear the coat of arms of Henry VI. In more recent times, the Farmer's Bar next door saw the first gigs by local bands like Marillion, Wild Willie Barrett, Orphee and Ardazell. Oh, there's Cromwell's chair. Now, don't sit in it, it's very uncomfortable. The upholstered varieties are better. And there's Cromwell's spy hole. Now, he could check out what was going on in the bar from his bedroom. Quite handy when you've got an army to look after. Oh, and here's the drink the director promised me. Ian Hunter of Mott the Hoople, in an interview with the BBC, said, Aylesbury is like a little San Francisco. In fact, the atmosphere got to me to such an extent that I almost considered moving there. But I moved to America instead.
The thing that really put Aylesbury on the rock map was Friars Club, which started in 1969, I think, and that attracted groups like Mott the Hoople and Genesis, and they were totally overwhelmed by the sort of reception they would get there. The audience just seemed to love them, lap them up, get enraptured, and so much so that I think David Bowie, when he was doing a showcase for American journalists, instead of taking them to somewhere like the Rainbow Theatre or something, he had this great coachload of Americans come up to Friars to see him there in what he felt was a more suitable environment, really. But none of the local groups could get out of the town even. And so we had this idea around about early 1976 to start this magazine up called the Aylesbury Rock Set, which was based on a magazine called the New York Rocker. I'd just come back from New York, and a friend of mine was putting out this magazine, the New York Rocker, which glamorised the scene over there. You'd have things like what Debbie Harry has for breakfast. The upshot of it was that we did actually create this scene. Everybody started believing in the great myth that something was actually happening in Aylesbury, and all the bands were great. And from that moment on, the music press started getting peppered with the word Aylesbury. Otway got a record deal, Warren Harry got a record deal. Groups were clamouring to come up and play at Friars, and there was even a little pub scene going on where groups would come up from places like Bristol and Canterbury for pitiful amounts of money.
After the worldwide success of Led Zeppelin, 4 Aylesbury musicians formed a band called Concrete Parachute. The band could have made it, but perhaps the world wasn't ready for 2 bands that sounded exactly the same.
Before I started Friars, I was always in local bands and always involved in the local scene, local bands. There was a band called Smokey Rice, who the guitarist went on to play in Genesis and the bass player went on to play in Blondie. So there's always been a good local band scene here. But when we developed Friars all through the 70s, I was always very, very disappointed that no real big band came out of this area.
Benjamin Disraeli, whose statue this is, Prime Minister of England and Member of Parliament for Aylesbury, finally made it when the group Cream dedicated their album Disraeli Gears to him.
When we started in 1969, we were really a bunch of hippies. I probably still am an old hippie, if I'm being honest. But then suddenly, in 1976, 77, everything changed. I remember the first real gig we put on was the end of 76 with the Stranglers, and it was like a revolution.
Revolutionary? Well, I think it was about as revolutionary as a frying pan. I'd say they were at the forefront of a revolution in musical apathy. I remember on the one occasion when we appeared at Friars, they were very interested in throwing things at us, and that amused us no end, but revolutionary in any other context is beyond me.
And then later, just later in early '77, we put on the Ramones. And that was one of the wildest gigs anybody'd ever seen. It turned everything upside down. We decided, no, we'd go for it. And in the end, Friars was just behind the leading edge in the whole punk movement in this country. If we'd been at the leading edge, we'd probably have got closed down. There were bands like the Ramones, Susie and the Banshees, 999, The Clash. All these sort of bands all played Friars regularly. It was a very, very exciting period.
The Doomsday Book in 1087 stated that the rateable value in Aylesbury was £65 per year. Oddly enough, this is exactly twice the amount local promoter Chris France paid The Clash for their first gig outside London, here at the Tiddenfoot Leisure Centre in 1976.
I also paid the Damned 35 quid to play here, and at another gig just up the road I had the Stranglers for, I think I got 35 quid I had them in for, and the Damned, no, I had the Jam in for 20 quid, and XTC for a tenner. But when it came to Paul Young, 45 quid.
In the summer of '85, on the two Live Aid shows in Philadelphia and Wembley, two of the most classic live shows, I think, of all time, 21 of the artists had appeared at Friars Aylesbury, which I guess is a pretty good compliment for the town.
Far more influential than anything you've seen so far, there is one venue in Aylesbury that is directly responsible for bringing Bob Dylan, Simon and Garfunkel, Bruce Springsteen, Billy Joel, Alison Moyet, Wham and ABBA directly into the homes of everybody in the UK. It is in fact the pressing plant of a well-known record company. I myself considered this place so important that as an aspiring 10-year-old rock and roller, I stood outside these gates with my sister and sang all day, hoping to get discovered. I didn't.